Hello, you have dialed in for a seminar on visual experiences transforming media. My name is Lynn Comp. I'm the Vice President of the Data Platforms Group and General Manager of the Visual Infrastructure Division at Intel. And I want to thank Digital Hollywood for bringing us in to talk about this new transformation that many of us have been talking about. But the reality is, I think that we're all having a more extreme experience with than we might have anticipated earlier as growing as a medium. And the experiences are evolving. Years ago, we were talking about 8K and ultra high definition. And as somebody who goes on camera a lot, I do understand some of the challenges you're looking at when you're on camera with that kind of experience. But it's even going past that, where people are really wanting to have their view. So we talked about 360 video on the other page. This is mono and stereo, and this has been an interesting opportunity for education, sometimes for healthcare or even health education. Then moving to the right, you can see computer vision, object identification. So things like factory floors doing visual recognition to understand when there's defects happening. And then finally to the right, there's been this ongoing push towards more personalization, seeing the views that you want to see, experiencing the endings that you want to experience, and being able to do that in a curated content environment, as opposed to things that are a little bit more free, like gaming for experiences, also somewhat curated, but being your own digital director, whether it's on bullet or slow-mo, these are all interesting experiences. And even in our case where we've had some work with the with some of the sports teams and their use of different camera angles, whether for their own performance optimization or for broadcast, there's this huge interest in seeing the angle that you want to see when you want to see it. And greater personalization is definitely a challenge of the user experiences in this market. And we're finding that an end-to-end focus is really important. We look at the visual cloud market in the context of 5 workloads or use cases. Media processing and delivery is the basics, mostly because when you're experiencing content in one place and it's either been stored or created or curated in another, you end up very often needing to change formats, have compression, have content protection, have security that makes it easier for the video format to show up in a good quality. On top of that, you can do analytics, whether it's to improve the stream, whether it's to get intelligence about what people are watching, or whether it is really about doing analysis on a video stream. It's all on top of media, immersive media. This is layering different vantage points or an artificial viewpoint on top of a reality viewpoint, such as mixed reality or augmented reality. Cloud graphics, remote workstations, this is not necessarily new, but it is all under this umbrella of workloads. And then cloud gaming is definitely something that is starting to really build momentum over the last year in terms of people being able to have more flexibility with how they're experiencing different games and not necessarily being as wed to a specific type of hardware, or getting access to more game titles. Another thing about cloud gaming that's been really important is the ability to play games or interact with people that are worldwide and not just on site. So an end-to-end focus for delivery of these kinds of use cases is really important. And so this is why when we look at visual cloud at Intel, we don't just look at content creation. We don't just look at visual effects. We're trying to look at it from an end-to-end perspective, because we found things like some of the video on demand services, their total cost of service delivery tends to be more on bandwidth than it does on the computational needs of processing and getting that video file ready to be transmitted or be downloaded. And so in their case, they're looking for the implications the network has, or for the edge, like how do we better efficiently use the distribution mechanisms at the edge, such as CDN, to give a better experience for our users. So the industry's already started looking at this as an end-to-end basis. Video algorithms and encoder algorithms really do vary based on the kind of screen, the size of screen, the video formatting, if is it 1080 or is it 4K, to give a great user experience in the level of visual quality as well as interactivity. Many of our customers are basically looking at this whole continuum because the content is produced or created or curated in one place and it's stored nearby, but it's being consumed on another device remotely across a network very often. And so you have to think about the whole thing going all together. And then looking at that, the degree to which you need a mix of hardware and software flexibility. For example, if you're just worried about the absolute possible fastest encode and you're in an environment where you're doing more of an enterprise meeting with a small screen, like the image you can see of me right now, you're probably going to be fine with the type of integrated encoder that's in the laptop or the desktop platform you're using, because it's not necessarily intended to be replayed on a huge screen. On the other hand, if you are looking for content that has a great visual experience on a laptop, as well as on a 60-inch screen and 4K and 8K, then you're probably going to end up wanting to spend time on software optimization, both for bandwidth as well as for algorithm quality. So it's not a one size fits all. It'd be great if it was, but we think an extensible architecture that allows you to build that entire continuum and think about different experiences for each of the types of services delivering is the really important way to go. Services innovation platform is another thing that we think is really important. And this is based on a couple things that have inspired us. One is we've had some conversations with one of the vice presidents from Sony, and he's talked about how important it is for them to be able to, but also the simplicity of how do you innovate on a platform. We had a startup that was doing some of these services that we showed you earlier, and they said, I would really like it if you would simplify for me how I would put a reference service together, and then it's on me to do the last optimization for the type of service experience. So I choose whether it's hardware or software, but get me started on how many engineers they have access to, as well as free the creativity to be anytime, anywhere. The last thing that's really important here is an ecosystem collaboration. It's been very, very difficult for many companies to keep up with the pace of innovation by doing everything themselves. The collaboration of many companies coming together to deliver a service, each bringing their area of expertise, so their partner doesn't have to replicate their expertise, they can lean on their expertise. These are really, really important concepts because a lot of these interactive experiences are so agile and so flexible that it's very, very difficult to approach these service deliveries like you're in a lab and like you have a lot of time. So extensible architectures, one of the things that we have focused on at Intel, especially in the infrastructure side, is data-centric infrastructure. Move faster, store more, and process everything. If you've had any background in systems theory, related to the internet, or even if you've had the experience where your own personal computer, you upgraded the processor, but you really didn't see the speed from that processor upgrade because you needed more memory, or perhaps you needed a little bit more acceleration capability, or maybe you are on such an old system that the processor that was new and the memory that was new just couldn't get enough packets between each other to keep the processing efficient. It's the system balance, and it's always coming down to how do you move the data, how do you keep the right data near the process that is running, and then how do you balance all of that with the right level of performance. And so it's a software and system level optimized approach. And again, hopefully you're tying this back to what I said earlier. On top of all of this is service delivery. And so at a platform level, you need to have a balance between performance, data movement, and the size of the files that you're working on. You need that at a data center level. And for companies that are delivering these end-to-end services, they actually have to look at it from the data center all the way out through the edge down to the client. and really think through the balance points and how do we take advantage of latency, or how do we avoid latency to be able to deliver these great experiences. Now, I mentioned extensible software as well. To the challenge of our friend in the startup, we had said, we're going to open source an encoder, and we did that. And they said, that's really nice, but you've only solved one of my problems because there's decode, inferencing, rendering, and encode. So what are you doing to make it easier for me to have reference pipelines, and then I go figure out how to fine tune for a specific experience? And so we thought that made a lot of sense. And last year, about this time, we announced something called Open Visual Cloud. And the goal is to accelerate services innovation. You can see that we have a number of reference pipelines that have already been posted. They're on GitHub. They're available in Docker. CDN transcode, intelligent ad insertion, that's software only as well as hardware accelerated. Things like smart city traffic management or 360 VR streaming. All of that is built on top of FFmpeg, GStreamer, and Nginx. And so underneath that, what we've done is we started layering under it some of the higher level ingredients that we have that are really about getting the most optimal experience and balance between off the shelf and fine-tuned for the experience. So things like OpenVINO, scalable video technology, the encoder we open sourced. And then all of that is effectively on top of the technology that we've been talking about as a company, OneAPI. Because our goal, I mentioned intelligent ad insertion. We have two recipes, and one's optimized in software only, and one is actually optimized for a Movidius-based accelerator card. And we want to make it with OneAPI something that is seamless. So if you are traversing Intel hardware and software portfolio for Visual Cloud, you don't have to rewrite things. That is the point of the Open Visual Cloud, is give you fast reference points, a couple recipes with no need to change the upper layers based on changing the hardware. It's really about, do I need best performance? And do I need the most compute and the fine-grained algorithmic complexity of something like a Xeon? And that's really my focus point. Or do I need stream density? So in the case of the Movidius-based accelerator card, depending on the bit rate as well as the resolution, you can get up to 24 streams. And so the choice is yours, and we're trying to make it really easy with this software extensibility that you can get these services set up very, very quickly and have at least a couple optimization points. So you don't have one-size-fits-all service experiences. You can actually customize them for your different customers. Now, some of the other service platform innovations that we've been looking at is volumetric video. And what's fascinating is this was definitely a trend. It was on the hype cycle. And then it felt like the endpoints were really getting in the way. But what we're seeing now is use of iPads, use of my own device, things like telepresence. So you can enhance the 2D video experience in conferencing systems, education, entertainment, and events. With us being in this kind of shelter in place, we're finding that it's really difficult to have the experience of a music venue or even a conference. And so things like volumetric 360 video are able to bring an experience that we're used to doing in person, but we just don't have the ability to do that right now. Education and training is another great example where we're really seeing this come through and be really critical and important. And then I mentioned customized ad insertion, facial recognition. We have a couple different examples of ad insertion on the Open Visual Cloud GitHub repository. And it's interesting because the application of AI is so flexible. We wanted to get in front of you a couple ideas. So one is facial recognition. And this can be used for a couple different things. In theater trailers, just being applied with the same actor and actresses. You'll also see this getting used a lot for cataloging. So basically, it recognizes the face of an actor, and then it makes it easier to do searches on looking for movies or TV shows or going through the archives of that actor's catalog. Object detection is another one where, you can see this approach we show here, which is if people are watching videos about dogs, then it's probably a good bet they might need dog food. And so the object detection can see what's being played, and then it matches out of the right catalog of ads something that might be relevant for that specific video stream. And then emotion detection as well. One of our ad insertion demos that we had played earlier in last year talked about how people that were watching boats, they were watching travel videos, maybe they needed a vacation. And so you would be able to recognize and detect their emotion and then give them an idea of, do they need relaxation? Should we put them on a boat in a lake in the mountains? Or are they interested in something more like an amusement park? So this is a really fast example of media analytics. There's almost unlimited ways to apply this. These are specific to advertising and some of the references that we have on Open Visual Cloud, but there's many, many more. Now, we mentioned ecosystem collaborations, and one of the things that we did want to just put out in front of you is this is a demo that we did at the International Broadcasting Conference in Amsterdam in 2019. And it was end-to-end. There were 8 different vendors. And the thing that's really amazing about this experience is that it came together in about 2 months. And so we had an idea. We are doing this conference for the first time. The venue that we were going to be hosting in was very small. We were getting a lot of registrations. And so someone thought, well, what if we did a 360 broadcast of the conference? And so they set this up with 8 different vendors, and you can see the logos here. And the Visual Cloud Conference, the first ever with IBC and Intel sponsoring it, we managed to do stitching and production out and putting that on top of the Google Cloud. And then we use the Intel open source encoder. So the front end was IBC, Intel, and Vosis. And then it was hosted in Google Cloud and encoded with the scalable video technology. And then Tiled Media had a clear VR packager, software package that then allowed it to be put out in CDNs, hosted by companies like Akamai, and then applications were being written with Iconic Engine, Oculus, and Tiled Media that would allow people to watch the conference on any screen. And I happened to be there in person, and what was really funny is the standing room only conference was very crowded. It was a little warm and a little uncomfortable. And right outside of the conference, there happened to be a coffee bar with biscuits and cookies. And so as we went further throughout the day, they found that people were not just the overflow who were watching the conference. It was actually people that they really needed a coffee break, but they didn't want to stop listening to the conference. So you would walk out of the conference area, and then you would see people with coffee and a cookie watching the conference that they had just been inside for. We had up to 200 people dialed in simultaneously. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but this was set up in 2 months, and it was broadcasting a technical conference. So that was a lot, given the specialization of the audience. We had people dialing in as far as Korea. We had people dialing in from Amsterdam. And so it was a really fascinating experience in terms of both how quickly an ecosystem could come up, set up the experience, it worked, and then the way that people were interacting with the experience. So mentioning a couple successes, we'll talk about ATEM. We've had a number of customers that have leveraged some of the optimizations that we've talked about earlier. You can see ATEM, Anivia, Quilt, and Tiled Media. And I'll just briefly touch on what each of them was really focused on. ATEM is looking at the TCO savings. I mentioned the need for bandwidth savings and bandwidth efficiency. And so they managed to have their software encoders taking advantage of some features on the Xeon processors and getting up to 35% TCO. Anivia took a different approach. They actually leveraged an instruction called VNNI, which is really intended to be about accelerating AI. And they managed to get 20% more performance for an over-the-top service. Now, completely different use case. This is talking about CDN and the ability to use the processor plus a new memory type that is almost as fast as DRAM and almost as big as a storage box. So you basically, this huge flat memory space, and give a much better user experience when you are delivering double the cache depth. And you've got people who have got cloud DVR, and they want to fast forward in a frame or they want to go backwards. They get double the size at the CDN node, which basically means they don't have as much buffering. They can smoothly fast forward or rewind through the stream. And then finally, Tiled Media, they were our partner on the 360 part of the VR experience I just talked about. And they took advantage of the Xeon Scalable processor as well as the encoder. And that allowed them to distribute the FA Cup final in live 8K 360 VR with a bitrate reduction of 75%, which is significant if you're delivering over the top and you don't actually own the broadcast environment and infrastructure. So in summary, this is just a really quick overview. There's so many different use cases and experiences to talk about. There's a wide range of visual experiences exploding on the cloud and leveraging the edge. And we've experienced this firsthand. Service providers and organizations, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. It's important to have a scalable infrastructure with a collection of hardware, software, and open source tools. I remember being in the telecommunications business. There was a time when statistical models planned around very, very specific known events. And the whole infrastructure was planned out for Christmas, Easter, and Mother's Day. And then the world changed. What you were experiencing through the telephony experience was very different. And suddenly everything needed to be much more flexible, capable of bursty demands that weren't unexpected. And we're seeing in the experience with shelter in place that a lot of that work has paid off. And so very similar with these visual experiences, we think scalable infrastructure with the right level of flexibility in hardware, software, and open source tools is important. And then finally, we don't give a one-size-fits-all answer out of visual infrastructure at Intel. Intel-based solutions, we've got a huge toolbox at our disposal, and our goal is a balanced portfolio because our passion is finding how to match an experience objective with the right TCO, and then what are the right platforms to fit underneath that. There's no one size fits all, but we do love learning with the customers as we're all working towards this future of visual experiences on demand and interactive. And with that, I think the presentation is ending and I will stop sharing. I do see a question while I'm waiting to see if Victor is going to come back in here. How has edge computing impacted media consumption? Thankfully, we have edge computing, at least on the downstream version, because the CDN experience of all the downloads and the streaming services coming online are definitely benefiting from what edge computing had been put in place. So thank goodness the media industry had already gotten ready to some extent, at least for the download. User-generated content upload, I think that we're still learning through as an industry. But I think media and video as an industry overall, really we're on the front end of pioneering the ways in which edge computing can deliver a better experience. Yep, I think in the chat window, there's one. I think video streaming is only going to be on the rise. Basically, the shelter in place is really going to, I think, get people used to being on camera, used to being able to interact through video. And when you look at some of the online massive multiplayer games, a lot of the draw in things like Fortnite was being able to interact with people. I think that will just only increase. I think both. One of the things Intel advocates for is hybrid multi-cloud, because depending on what your role is, you might be a filmmaker and you have to go on location. And so it's really hard to build a data center in a 3-week notice that you're going on for production. So in that case, starting with a public cloud that is local may be a good option. If, however, you're in LA or you're near some of the studio investments, you might have a different perspective. If you're an individual animator, you're probably going to have most of your work on site, whether it's a private cloud or a private node. So those are just some of the ideas. I see another one about green initiatives. Absolutely. You probably may or may not be aware, but Microsoft and Satya Nadella have taken on the challenge of having a 0% footprint in terms of environmental impact. And I think you'll see a lot more of that. We already have a number of the service providers that are building close to water cooling because it's much more efficient and it's a better use of our natural resources. So you'll see a significant effort towards that. And it started before, I think, a lot of the efforts, but it's just we're gonna end up leaning in much more quickly towards how do we best leverage the resources that we have where we need them.
Well, Lynn, I think our time is up, and
yes.
It's a wonderful presentation. We want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I know the audience will be really appreciative, so let's give a virtual hand, and thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.